You want to help me clap? Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Stephanie Francisco. I'm Communications Director at Conservation Alabama. We have a couple special guests today. We are joined by Alex Taurel. He is the Conservation Program Director for the League of Conservation Voters. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. This is Evangeline. I can't believe we've gone 5 videos and this is the first one she's been in. This is a real red letter day.
I'm honored to be on her program.
Yes, right. Okay, no hands in the nose. Okay, and just to give folks an idea at home watching, Alex, your organization, League of Conservation Voters, is actually Conservation Alabama's parent organization. And essentially what we do at the State House, lobbying on the behalf of the environment and conservation issues, LCV does for Congress. And we benefit tremendously from that relationship. We have all of your staff's body of knowledge, all of the great information that y'all gather from working with states across the country. So we feel really lucky to have that at Conservation Alabama. It makes our lives much easier. I think it makes us more successful to have all of that expertise to draw on. So thank you so much for joining us today. In the middle of everything else going on. And if you could tell us first just about the kind of work you do for LCV as Conservation Program Director.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Stephanie. Well, so I run our program to protect more land and water across the country. And so, as you said, we're mostly focused on Washington, D.C. and changing kind of the national laws and the policies here federally to give people more access to public lands and ways they can enjoy the outdoors. But one of the really cool parts of my job that you already alluded to is this state partnership that we've got with Conservation Alabama and more than 30 other kind of state affiliates across the country. We couldn't do our work without the on-the-ground sort of voices who are telling us what people out in the States actually really care about. We're in a bubble in DC and we don't really know what folks really care about. And so it's really great to have on the ground partners who can help, also put pressure on their members of Congress from the state. So we really value the partnership that we've got with you guys at Conservation Alabama. And so it seems like folks in your state are really into their public lands. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I've seen in recent years at Alabama.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a success story for us over and over again. Alabamians really have strong ties to our state, to the land and water. A lot of us grew up in rural communities. I think you see that, as the older we get, even if we move to cities, we think of ourselves as rural people in some ways. So we've had a couple tests of this lately. In 2016, there was a statewide amendment to preserve state parks funding, and that passed with 80% of the vote. And then in 2014, we renewed our state land trust with 75% of the vote. So, this is something, a very red state that transcends party lines, all the normal things that divide us sort of fade away when it comes to public lands. And we are excited to keep working on that. Through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That's something we started working on with y'all, I guess, in 2018. So if folks watching at home aren't familiar with that, what does the Land and Water Conservation Fund do? Yeah.
Well, we call it America's Best Conservation and Recreation Program. It's a national program. It's funded everything from expansions of national parks like the Grand Canyon to community parks in our cities and towns, to historical sites that really preserve America's history and culture. And so virtually every state and every county in America has a park or a site that receives some sort of funding from LWCF. And one of the really cool things about the program is that it provides those kind of close to home recreational opportunities and helps address kind of an injustice that's out there of just too many folks who don't have a park nearby. I'm lucky I do. But I really like that I get to work on a program that helps give that access to folks who historically haven't had it. But obviously this is, it's a national program with impacts in Alabama and elsewhere. So let's talk about the state. Like what, better than I do, what places has LWCF helped protect in Alabama?
Well, it's a fun thing to talk about because when I started working on this particular issue in 2018, I wasn't as familiar with the program. So I started looking around and seeing what of the places I was familiar with actually were there because of LWCF funding. And it ranges from like the really small community parks. We've got one here in Montgomery called Lagoon Park that has walking trails. It's kind of your quintessential city park. And then there's Battleship Park in Mobile, which is where there's the USS Alabama battleship housed there. So that's obviously a historic component in addition to the public space for people to enjoy. It's right there on Mobile Bay. It's beautiful views of the city. It's a gorgeous place to go. We have the more traditional land acquisition programs. There's the Ruffner Mountain program, which is right in downtown Birmingham on top of a mountain you can see forever. And then the Bankhead National Forest. And then one of my favorite places is the Bon Secours Wildlife Refuge, which is in Baldwin County, where I'm from. So those kinds of places, it's amazing to see the breadth of properties that Land and Water Conservation Fund is able to support in our state and across the country. And I guess, tell us a little bit about the campaign over the last couple years to protect LWCF, because I think we sort of get the idea that these are federal programs, that they're there and they should be fine. So what was the issue that LCV and other partners were working on?
Yeah, and I appreciated hearing about the breadth of these the places protected in your state, right? And it's just a program that people are not very familiar with, but they've certainly benefited from these sorts of investments in parks and stuff. And so I sort of started to refer it to as like America's best kept secret, But so what we've been working on is that LWCF has been around for more than 50 years, but during that time, it always had a kind of sunset to it, a date after which the program would expire and sort of put it at risk. And so a couple of times during its history, it actually did expire and really put at risk the future of the program and all those benefits that it provides to communities. So what we did was in 2018, together with you guys and other state affiliates across the country, we launched a campaign to permanently reauthorize LWCF, kind of extend it so that it would never again expire, right? That was always going to be a big uphill battle. You guys see from the outside how dysfunctional DC is, the gridlock, et cetera. But somehow this program is so bipartisan that within less than a year, we got it done. And we passed both the House and the Senate on overwhelming bipartisan votes. And so now LWCF is going to be around for the long haul and isn't ever going to expire again. That's a big deal. And we really couldn't have done that without the work of Conservation Alabama and our other state affiliates. So just thank you, and we just really appreciate the partnership on this stuff.
No, I think it's a really valuable relationship because y'all have the top line view of what's going on in DC, and you have all of that working knowledge, and we can do some of the groundwork to make sure that people understand that connection between this kind of program and the places they really love and care about. And I think we saw that in Alabama with Forever Wild, we saw that with state parks, and then with LWCF, where when you make it clear, you're able to enjoy these beautiful places and preserve them for your kids in the future and their kids because there are programs set up. People get it and they like the programs and they're on board, as we saw. So now that LWCF is totally permanently reauthorized, is it safe? Are you done with this particular issue at LCV?
I wish. I wish. Could work myself out of a job, right? No, unfortunately, the program isn't safe, and that's it's going to be around for the long haul. But the problem is there's no guarantee that it's going to get a dime of funding. And without funding, communities don't get their parks. National parks are going to remain, at risk of development on their doorstep. And historical sites could also be lost to development. And so that's why last year, after we permanently reauthorized LWCF, we moved to kind of phase 2 of our campaign to provide it with full and permanent funding at $900 million every single year. And so we were working on that campaign. And then in early March, we actually had a really big breakthrough this year when President Trump, kind of out of the blue, tweeted that he wanted Congress to send him a bill that fully funds LWCF, and pair it up with some legislation to address the maintenance backlog in our national parks, things like restoring trails and fixing campgrounds and visitor centers, that sort of stuff. What was interesting about it was Trump had slashed LWCF in his budgets every single year. So his tweet was kind of a surprise to those of us who work on this issue. But hey, look, we'll take it, right?
Right.
And so, and so I think the very next day, a new bill got introduced in the Senate called the Great American Outdoors Act that does what Trump sort of said he wanted Congress to do, which was a bill that combined full funding for Land and Water Conservation Fund with money to address the National Parks maintenance backlog. That bill now has 59 bipartisan co-sponsors in the Senate who are way north of a majority. And the co-sponsors include Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, right? And those guys, the party leaders, they hardly ever agree on anything, right? And so the Great American Outdoors Act quickly picked up a ton of momentum, was on track to go to the Senate floor, and this was here in March. And then, as everybody's well aware, coronavirus kind of turned into a full-blown crisis and rightfully kind of started commanding everybody's attention, including the Congress.
Well, I'm interested to hear your perspective, being in DC, how has coronavirus changed the Congress's schedule, where, what the priorities are? What do you see happening in the next couple months?
Yeah. I mean, it's upended everything. Just like all folks in this country are having to grapple with this and suffer from it. The Congress is in some ways sort of no different. It's totally changed what's going on there. And so, sort of one day to the next, Congress rightfully became incredibly, laser-like focused on responding to the public health crisis and the economic crisis that COVID-19 has caused. And so they've passed in the last month some major legislation, as folks are well aware of, to fund relief efforts. And we're definitely expecting kind of more emergency legislation to get passed in the coming months. In addition, there's been some logistical challenges, just like all Americans are dealing with, in the ability of Congress to even just sort of convene. Lawmakers are worried about social distancing, and they don't want to get the virus themselves. A lot of them are, not spring chickens, right?
Right.
And so they're rightfully quite concerned about it. And so the House and Senate are both actually out of session, and it's not totally clear like when they're actually going to come back. The party leaders are in DC and Congress, and they're still negotiating some of these, emergency measures. And Congress can still pass bills by kind of unanimous consent, even when the members of Congress aren't physically present. So Congress kind of continues to work, but it is a very different atmosphere than it normally is.
And how do you think those changes are impacting the Great American Outdoors Act?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, we recognize that obviously responding to the public health emergency and ensuring that businesses and individuals can receive money from the government to stay afloat during these tough times. I mean, all of that, rightfully so, has taken priority in Congress, right? And so that's what Congress is focused on, and as it should be. I think at the same time, as all of us kind of self-quarantine and deal with the anxiety and stir craziness of the situation we're in, a lot of people are turning to parks and trails and forests kind of as a way to cope. I don't know about you, Stephanie, but, my wife and I, we regularly take our kids out to parks and trails and go biking, get exercise, fresh air. I mean, we definitely, don't get me wrong, we definitely keep our 6 feet of distance from folks. But we see a lot of people out on those trails who are running and biking, a lot more than we normally see. And we're seeing that happen, kind of in parks across the country. It seems like we kind of never valued our green spaces as much as we're doing today. And so, it's hard not to draw the conclusion that, we need to expand the number of places where folks can be in nature, and to do so sort of without crowding and to have it be kind of close to home, right? We need to ensure that those places are protected and maintained, today and for future generations. And so, and I think another thing that obviously folks are dealing with is the economic crisis is hitting just about everybody in the country. It's certainly the case for the outdoor recreation economy, right? The gear shops, the fishing guides, the restaurant in the gateway community next to the national park. those sorts of businesses, they've been forced to close, and they're really critical, like economic drivers for the communities, particularly in a lot of rural areas, right? And so travel, tourism, all that's been incredibly hard hit. So we've got to find ways to support kind of a strong reopening of the economy when we're ready for that, and a sort of long-term recovery for those who are reliant on public lands, like for their livelihoods. And, you take a look at what the Great American Outdoors funds, and those parks and public lands that they're investing in, that's infrastructure, right? And, when you build a community park or help fix up a national park, that means jobs for folks in the construction industry. So, we certainly think that as Congress, kind of turns its attention eventually to getting our economy kind of back on track, that things, and fixing our broken infrastructure and recovering from the sort of isolation that we're kind of currently in, we think things like the Great American Outdoors Act ought to be kind of considered in that mix. And so that's what we're sort of focused on here at LCV, and I think that's where you guys and Conservation Alabama and some of your membership can really come in and play a role here. So, I mean, I'd love to hear about the Alabama kind of congressional delegation and sort of how they've been doing on public lands kind of in recent years, and obviously you're following that stuff closely in the state.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix. And I will say, if anybody watching is like a real policy wonk and wants to look at the breakdowns of how our delegation has voted on pretty much any issue related to conservation in the last congressional session, they should go to scorecard.lcb.org. And that's one of the great resources we have, being an LCB state affiliate, is this amazing scorecard that tracks all of the votes in Congress each session and then gives each member a score based on how they're voting on conservation policy. So that's a huge help, and definitely check that out if you really want to delve into this. But the top line, is that we have Senator Jones in his first term here after winning the special election in 2017, and he signed on as a co-sponsor of the Great American Outdoors Act. He's been a champion for public lands in his time in office. I know my boss, our executive director, was on Capitol Hill last year as part of LCV's lobby day, and that was one of the things she talked about with Jones and with Representative Terry Sewell's staff and Senator Richard Shelby's staff. Those are all folks who are out there really taking a stand for public lands, I would say. Farther down I should say that Representative Sewell actually got the Alabama delegation's highest score on the LCD scorecard this year. So congratulations to her. That's a big achievement. Yep. We have some of the other folks, Representatives Byrne, Roby, Rogers, and Adderholt. They all voted to permanently reauthorize LCB, but they weren't co-sponsors of the bill to fund it. And then Representatives Brooks and Palmer did not vote to permanently reauthorize in a water conservation fund. So that's not great. We always keep a little note of that in our head when it's election time. So yeah, I would say, and again, if you want to check out scorecard.lcb.org, if you're watching, that's the best place to find that kind of information. But we're lucky to see, again, that sort of bipartisan carryover where we've got Republicans, Democrats in our congressional delegation working to protect these places in Alabama that really matter a lot.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And, we're working in the next couple of months to try to get this Great American Outdoors Act passed. And and those of us who are working in DC on this stuff, really where we really see benefit is when, constituents get in touch with their members of Congress and weigh in and say, like, hey, I really like this bill, you should pass it. So I know you've got some resources set up. So how can your members and other folks kind of get involved and help support the Great American Outdoors Act?
Yeah, we've put together an action alert, and this is something we do during our state legislative session pretty often too. So I know folks watching will be familiar with them. And I'll put a link to that in the description box of the video, but then go to conservationalabama.org/action, and it will be linked there. And that basically just lays out a lot of the points that Alex shared, the value of the Great American Outdoors Act, the importance of Land and Water Conservation Fund and outdoor recreation, even right now, especially right now, and it takes you directly to both senators and then your member of Congress. So it's really easy, and I totally agree. I mean, that is what we see time and time again during session, that's what makes the difference, is when people take a minute to send a note or pick up the phone and make a call. They listen, and it makes a big impact. And I know it makes Alex's job easier when we come back, whenever Congress goes back to some kind of normal, when you and other folks in LCB can go to the Hill and say, remember how you got all these messages from folks in Alabama? We're going to talk about this now. So that helps kind of grease the wheels for a good conversation, hopefully. Alex, just thank you so much for taking the time today and for all this work on public lands. Certainly we will think of you when we go to parks again, probably today. And I appreciate everything you're doing in Washington.
Yeah, no, thank you to you guys, Conservation Alabama, your members. It makes my job so much easier, and together I think we got a real great opportunity here to get this done. So thank you, and yeah, go out and safely enjoy your park, and hope everybody stays safe out there. So thanks, Stephanie.
All right.
So do you want to be in the movie? You want to be in the data?
Do you want to come be in the movie?
No, I don't want to be.
So this guy Silas here, my son, one of the things we're going to talk about today in this video Q&A is a program called the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and this guy Silas crawled for the very first time a couple of years ago at a state park in Vermont that was funded by the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So this place has always had a little special place in our heart, and it's one of the reasons I keep working on funding this program. So
What we'll do, thank you so much for all of your, Evangeline, I'm going to boot you out of here.